Hello, friends. Today's chapter of the day is 2 Chronicles chapter 25. And really, it's a tale, a cautionary tale about the dangers of half-hearted obedience. And it's the story of King Amaziah. So Amaziah, 25 years old, he becomes the king of Judah, and he reigns for 29 years. And what does it say about him? Verse 2, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, yet not with a whole heart. And that's kind of your summary of the story of Amaziah. But then we see it really get fleshed out. So he follows the Bible. He takes power for his family, killed those who killed his father, but doesn't kill their children. He's obedient to the scriptures that say we die for our own sins. Then what does he do? He assembles the men of Judah, puts together this army. He's going to go fight the army of Seir, and he pays to get the army of Israel to help him out. But a prophet comes to him and says, verse 7, O king, do not let the army of Israel go with you, for the Lord is not with Israel, with all these Ephraimites. But go, act, be strong for battle. Why should you suppose that God will cast you down before the enemy? For God has power to help or to cast down. And what he's being rebuked about there is he's being rebuked by this anonymous man of God for failing to have faith in God, for reaching out to Israel, who has fallen even farther than Judah has at this point, when God is the one he should be trusting in. So what happens? He sends the army of Israel home. He says, I don't want you anymore. I paid for you, but I don't want you. And guess what? That hurt their feelings. And that's going to come back and bite them. But they win the battle. Verse 11, they took courage, led out his people in the valley of Salt, and struck down 10,000 men. Now here it gets dark. They captured another 10,000, took them to the top of a rock, and threw them down from the top of the rock, and they were all dashed to pieces. 10,000 thrown off the top of a rock and dashed to pieces. Wow. Anyhow, so while Judah's having this victory, the hurt feelings of Israel result in the people of Israel going in and raiding the towns of Judah while the people of Judah are off at war. So it's already coming back. This half-hearted obedience, this lack of faith in God is already coming back to bite him. He comes back from striking down the Edomites, that's the army of Seir, and he brings some of their gods with him. We see this so many times. He starts worshiping these false gods, and God rebukes him. And sends a prophet to him. Why have you sought the gods of a people who did not deliver their own people from your hand? A really good question in verse 15. Why are you worshiping the gods of a people who you just beat? They clearly aren't very good gods. Why are you turning from the God who gave you victory to the gods who give you defeat? And what a lesson that is for us. We have these periods of growth in our faith, times when our faith is strong, when we're growing, yet we keep turning back to sin. And that's kind of the same question. Why are we turning from something that gives us victory to something that just gives us defeat? And we know not only does it make us feel defeated, but sin has already lost the battle because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Kind of defies logic, yet it's a result of us lacking faith and lacking focus on God and his victory. So then we see Amaziah, the king of Judah, gets a little full of himself, and he starts talking. He starts talking to the king of Israel. Hey, let's make a treaty. And the king of Israel warns him in kind of a weird way. Verse 18 and verse 19. But Amaziah ignores it. So they go to battle, and Israel crushes them. So in God's kind of ironic justice, Judah is punished for allying with Israel and not having the faith to fight just with the faith in God. And their punishment is that they are conquered by Israel. So that's the story of Amaziah. We see him die a relatively shameful death, not being treated. He is buried with the kings, but doesn't have these sort of dignified celebrations of his life, not because he had no faith and no obedience, but because it wasn't wholehearted. So that's the prayer for all of us today. May our obedience not just be trying to find the line, trying to find how far we can go and stay within the bounds of the rules we set for ourselves, but really seeking God's will and trusting God with our life and obeying God as if we trust Him with our life. Because that obedience looks a lot different than what do I have to do to not get in trouble. So God bless. I hope this was helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you in a few days.